Boundaries are the biggest illusion of self-love. The more you understand how you're holding yourself back from accessing your personal power, the easier it gets to make choices that support your personal truth. Because these choices carry more information about yourself, including the consequences that are worth it for you when you set and reinforce your boundaries. When you set conscious boundaries, you choose to stop abandoning yourself and start living according to your own frame and values. But how can boundaries be an illusion and yet be so crucial for our emotional well-being? Setting boundaries, specifically emotional boundaries, means valuing your feelings, your time, your own sense of comfort, and asking that others value them too. Boundaries helps you to get to know you and your personal expressions in this life. They're not meant to be barriers between you and others. Instead, they enable you to discover your preferences, your needs, and your wants. What do you require to support yourself in being the best version you want to be? Setting boundaries can help you meet your needs to feel seen, heard, understood, and respected in your relationships. If you know and respect your current limitations, you will know when you can give, how much you can give, and when you're not able to give and need to say no. Knowing our boundaries allows us to better care for others and ourselves. How we treat ourselves, find joy and play, nourishment and rest, and connect with everyone and everything else. The more you learn to define your own boundaries, the better you become at respecting the boundaries of people in your life. When we lack boundaries, we often conform to the interests, desires, needs, and wants of others. Without boundaries, you may find yourself letting others decide for you. If you attempt to express your boundaries and others keep transgressing them, you must set consequences or break the relationship. Otherwise, you will only build up frustration, anger, and resentment, leading to emotional outbursts. Boundaries are crossed when someone disrespects, ignores, or isn't aware of your values or personal needs. For instance, a few years ago, I quit eating other animals, and this new personal boundary was confusing for those around me. Primarily because as a consequence of this new dietary lifestyle, I was no longer interested in hanging out with them the same way. Most of our meetups were around food, and many of my friends and family members saw my veganism as an unwanted boundary for them. So some of them tried to ignore it, others blatantly disrespected it, as in they provided me with meals with animal products, and some just stopped showing up altogether. I struggled with it for a while because my reality wasn't matching my inner world fast enough. I've learned that change takes time because transformation is a compounding process. This choice didn't just bring me unwanted consequences, it also opened up whole new worlds for me. New flavor combinations, new restaurants to try, taking gardening as a hobby, and most importantly, a deep coherence within my being. Soon enough, my outer world began reflecting that new boundary. Aside from all the virtue signaling that may transpire in some of our choices, the point we want to convey is that your life is being determined by the choices that you're making. These choices are your boundaries, and all boundaries have consequences. However, exploring your boundaries goes far beyond what you say yes or no to. It goes far beyond what you tell others they can or can't do, because you have no control over them anyway. It's about knowing what is valid for you, regardless of what others do or don't do, and then act accordingly. Since the outside world is a reflection of our inner world, when we lack an important boundary, it will be mirrored in how we think, feel, speak, and act. As such, our starting point begins, as you might have guessed it, with self-awareness. Because expanding your perception about yourself and your story changes the reflection you're getting of your life. And nowhere is this more apparent than when we look deeper into our triggers and trauma responses. Now, there's an argument to be made about how our emotional injuries are in fact more crippling than our physical ones. Our emotional boundaries are highly sensitive to stress. And stress can cloud our judgment, which means you'll have a harder time making sound choices. Stress causes us to suffer, and because no one ever taught us how to mitigate our suffering, we tend to downplay our emotional needs and suppress or deny them under a pile of self-criticism and many numbing agents. We make it worse. That's what we do. Our individual perspective is a unique boundary that defines us. It is our personal truth, and it includes our preferences, our thoughts, our feelings, our desires and needs, and how we express them in our relationship to other people, places, and things. They are essential for our emotional well-being, but they can only be realized through self-expression. Now, as adults, we have more freedom to pursue our creative endeavors, limited only by time and money, but our ability to assert our preferences will depend on the quality of our early attachments. In other words, self-expression in adulthood can be quite tricky if, as children, we had caregivers that were overprotective or emotionally unavailable and did not empathize with our curiosity to explore our environment. In a world where your entire existence is controlled by what your caregivers allow you to be or do, most, if not all of us, will develop coping mechanisms to survive these early emotional wounds or attachments. And when left unacknowledged, this can lead to transgenerational trauma. Different people respond differently to adverse events based on their relationship with their environment. We all develop our own coping mechanisms, and sometimes our instinctive response is to suppress our individuality in order to feel safe, have our needs met, and attempt to re-establish emotional connection. After all, we need all of these to survive. But how exactly do we do that? By blurring our boundaries through blame and anger. If we weren't listened to as children, we learned that voicing our needs or opinions are not important and will be met with indifference or even punishment. Because we lack the vocabulary to communicate our needs, in adulthood, we may complain or use self-deprecating words to hide our self-criticism and project our inability to express ourselves by blaming others, becoming quick to anger, or having a disproportional reaction to any unfair situation. We can also get defensive. Growing up in an emotionally chaotic environment doesn't give us a chance to feel we matter. In fact, it can make us hypervigilant and overly defensive because everything we do is either criticized or ignored. As adults, some of us might feel the need to over-explain ourselves so we can feel heard and understood, oftentimes sharing too much about ourselves or apologizing for things that have nothing to do with us. Others might choose to project their vulnerabilities onto others and then attempt to micromanage and manipulate them into changing their behavior. Another way we blur our boundaries is by becoming perfectionists and people pleasers. Perfectionism and people-pleasing behaviors disguise our need to repair our self-esteem. This core wound is so pervasive in today's society that most of our social technology is designed to satisfy it through instant gratification and social validation. When triggered, and because we are unable to soothe ourselves, we become insatiable in our subconscious need to save everyone so that we can feel safe. Since our society glorifies self-sacrifice to the detriment of our own emotional well-being, empaths, highly sensitive people, and those who suffered from emotional neglect in childhood are more likely to develop this savior complex because they see others' well-being as their responsibility. And finally, we may misunderstand what boundaries are. Growing up in enmeshed environments where everyone's needs are so entangled that it's hard to discern what belongs to you and what belongs to others represents a challenge to overcome feelings of guilt when setting boundaries. You are expected to do whatever is asked, no matter what. And since you never experienced meaningful support, in adulthood you will manipulate and journey others into guilt trips, such as, if you cared about me, you would do X, Y, and Z. There's this limiting concept of boundaries that reinforces the narrative where when we assert our individuality, we isolate ourselves from the people we love, or we may hurt those around us. But when it comes to emotional boundaries, that cannot be so. Our lives are defined by the relationships we develop with everything in existence. It's not just about other people, but also how we connect to ourselves and to the material world. our possessions, our jobs, other animals, and even Mother Nature. Life is connection, a reminder that all of these relationships support our individual experience on Earth. There is nothing that is not relationships, and boundaries or knowing ourselves invites more authentic connections with everything and everyone around us. This means that if you find yourself in a dysfunctional relationship, be it with yourself, another person, a group of people, or even with food, drugs, sex, or exercise, you can only set boundaries once you understand what needs are being met in that dynamic. This is not always an easy process because it requires you to be vulnerable and honest with yourself. Nevertheless, once you uncover what those needs are and how they're being met in that relationship, then you can begin exploring different ways to meet them outside of the unhealthy dynamic. Think, what would someone that loved themselves do? Get used to dissecting your own thought patterns as a potential cause for your dissatisfaction. Think about a recurrent situation in your life and how you currently respond to it. Think about how it makes you feel and then ask yourself, what would someone that loves themselves do in the same situation? Remember that you are the only variable in that equation that you can change. So when you get into the habit of exploring other possibilities, you transform your perception of how you feel, and that is what creates new outcomes. This is also how you show up for yourself. You can only operate from the level of consciousness you hold at any given moment, which means you are always doing your best. Now, it's easy to look back and criticize how you behaved, but the reality is that there are many factors that affect our responses in any given situation. And just because we know better doesn't mean that we're always going to live by those standards. So instead of doing your best, just show up for yourself. Showing up for yourself shifts the narrative from focus on performance and results to the process instead. This is called presence, and it's the place where we discover self-love, meaning, and impact. Showing up for yourself means recognizing and accepting that there are many things outside of your control, but you do have control over your choice to show up and do the work on yourself. Any challenge that you may have in showing up for yourself instead of for others is a reflection of your own self-worth. And speaking of self-worth, know your worth. Unhealthy forms of codependency, such as controlling behaviors, self-sacrifice, people-pleasing, or fear of rejection, only hurts everyone. Relationships are an equal investment. Just because you offer your support, it doesn't mean that it's on their terms. Understand that the love you have for yourself is the bar you set for the love you get from others. So the higher the bar, the more resilient your self-worth becomes. Because it's not the love that you feel for someone that attracts you to somebody, but how you allow yourself to be the love you already are in their presence. You can start by thinking of something trivial, like when you encounter someone for the second time, but you are unsure if they remember you. Instead of saying something like, "I'm sure you don't remember me," remind that person of the context in which you met them. "You might remember me from," and then add the context. This might seem unimportant, especially if they don't remember you, but the impression you give changes from someone who believes they're worth forgetting to someone who believes that they are worth remembering. Words matter because they reflect how we see ourselves. So speak up and speak kindly. You deserve kindness and loving communication. So if you ever feel like someone is misplacing blame out of hurt or guilt, acknowledge their pain and assert that you are not responsible for their feelings. Being accountable for others' behaviors is the recipe that brews feelings of anger, resentment, and guilt. One of the ways we humans bond with others is by highlighting the things we are having difficulty with in our life. But over time, those complaints and comparisons turn into habitual negative thought patterns that have a profound impact on how we view ourselves and the world. Choosing our words mindfully will reframe our internal dialogue and shape our struggles into challenges and our challenges into learning opportunities for hope and growth. This is why boundaries are the greatest act of kindness you can give to yourself and others, for in doing so, you are honoring yourself and them with your true colors, not a filter. Once you know what your boundaries are, you must be able to express them in your relationship so that others recognize your truth. In the description, you will find a few scripts you can use to set your boundaries in a compassionate way. But if you want to learn more on how to become more attuned to your needs and set healthy boundaries, we highly recommend you to watch our chapter on attachment styles. There you'll find tools to help you identify your core wounds and how they get triggered, prompts to uncover your relationship patterns, and personalized scripts to set and reinforce boundaries according to your attachment style. As you live through your own frame, honor your own feelings, recognize your own needs, and listen to your own inner guidance, you will begin building self-confidence and turning your resistance into assistance. You'll no longer feel like you need to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Instead, you will build trust in yourself, confidence to stand in your own personal power, and acknowledge and appreciate your individual perspective as a unique creation that defines who you are. You are not just a storyteller, you are the story, being created by every habit you take and every decision you make. When you take time to get to know and care for yourself, you will experience a life of purpose as you become more attuned to the inner guidance that drives those decisions. My name is Liz, and I want to empower you with new perspectives on emotional health, so you too can find deeper meaning and more purpose in your life. If you're interested in learning how you can cultivate that inner trust, stick around for the following video and let us show you.